Okay, this is Unit 3. This is about populations. We're going to start with population growth and resource availability and carrying capacity. This is going a little out of order from the course and exam description, but I think this is a good way to introduce populations to you. Now, we're going to talk first about some basic population characteristics. So we start with size. What is size of a population? Just how many individuals are in a given area at any given time. Larger populations may be safer from population decline. We can also talk about population density. This is just the number of individuals in a certain area. So, for example, we could take the number of individuals we have, divide by the area, and we'll get how many individuals per unit, like kilometer squared or meter squared. Higher density populations can lead to higher competition, disease outbreak, possibility of depleting your food source. We're going to look more about density in a couple of minutes. We can also look at population distribution. So, how are our individuals in our population spaced out compared to each other? They could be random, like our picture of trees up here at the top. Looks like a random distribution. They could be uniform. Sometimes territorial animals behave this way because they're having their own territory and they've spaced themselves out in a uniform way. Or they could be clumped here at the bottom, like as in a herd or group of animals with little clumps in different places. So sometimes it's interesting for scientists to look at what is the distribution of population and how. Now, there are a couple of things, 4 variables that you can write down that influence the size of a population. Now, we're just talking about size. In order to increase the size of a population, you could have individuals being born or individuals who immigrate to the area. And to decrease the population, individuals could die or they could emigrate or leave the area. Now, this picture that's showing you individuals coming in, immigration here, is showing you all these geese or ducks with little letters on them. Remember the A's, big A's and little A's represent alleles, which are forms of a gene. And when you have new individuals immigrate into your population, they're obviously bringing their genes with them. So they bring all that genetic diversity with them. So those are ways that population size can change. Now, let's take a look at how would we calculate population density. So I just want you to do this little problem and practice how to calculate the population density. So I have 2 little habitats here. They're both 5 meters times 5 meters on the side. And what you do here to get the density is you take the number of individuals and you divide by the area. So calculate the area of this habitat, 5 by 5, and then take the number of individuals you count and divide by that number and see what you get. You can pause the video for a minute here and come back and we'll give you the answer. Okay, here's the answer to that problem on the population density. We have an area of 25 square meters, and in habitat 2 we have 3 individuals. In habitat 3 we have a few more than 3, and if you divide those out you get 0.12 organisms per unit area, and this one is obviously more, 0.48 organisms per unit area. So calculating population density, something you might have to do later on. Okay, we're going to look at some factors that limit the population size. So we know how we can increase or decrease, but what limits a population size? We have 2 types of factors. One factor is called density dependent, and one factor is called density independent. So a density dependent factor is going to change its intensity depending on the density of the population. So examples of density dependent limiting factors could be competition, could be predation, could be maybe disease, could be parasitism, and all of these 4 will change according to how dense the population is. So take a look at my habitat 1 versus habitat 5. Habitat 1, a lot more dense than habitat 5. So think about how these factors right here can affect these 2 populations. If you had a disease and it hit habitat 1, it's much more likely to get all of those individuals sick than it is in habitat 5 because these guys are more spread out in habitat 5. Same thing with parasitism. The same thing with predation. If you've got predation going on, is there going to be more predation where there's more individuals? So all of these factors are dependent on how dense the population is, and that's density dependence, limiting factors. The other type of limiting factor is called density independent. And this is going to have the same intensity or the same effect on the population regardless of the density. So, something like a flood, a hurricane, a fire, a tornado, um, a tidal wave, a tsunami, any kind of natural disaster type thing, and also anthropogenically maybe pollution or habitat destruction. These are independent of the density. So how are they going to affect, how would a flood affect this habitat 1 versus habitat 5? It's the same. It doesn't matter how many individuals are here. If you have a flood and lots of them die, it's going to affect either system the same way. That's density independent. So when you're thinking density independent, think more like natural disasters or big pollution events caused by people. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the growth of populations. So, no population can grow indefinitely due to limiting factors. What would some limiting factors be that might limit the size of a population? And you can write these down on your paper as we go. One of them could be light, could limit the population, maybe for some plants in a forest. How about water? Always important for lots of organisms. Space, very important. Competition between organisms or between species or in a species. Predation could be one. And also disease. These things can limit the size of how much a population can grow. So let's think of some characteristics of populations that grow really rapidly. What would you say? So, the timing of reproduction, what would that be for a population that is growing very quickly? It's going to be early in life, which means that these mice don't have to be very old before they can already start having babies. So, if you reproduce early in life, then it's likely that you're going to lead to higher population growth. How about amount of time between generations? How is that going to play out if it's a rapidly growing population? It's going to be a short generation time. And so, what do we mean by generation time? We mean the time from when this little insect is born to when they can have babies. That's a very short generation time. For humans, it's quite a bit longer. For an insect like this, very short. That means in their lifetime, they can have a lot of offspring very quickly, cause the population to grow very quickly. How about the length of your reproductive life? How long can each organism actually reproduce? If it's a rapidly growing population, it's going to be a long time. In other words, that these bacteria, they don't live too long, but they can reproduce and reproduce and reproduce throughout their whole life. And that's going to lead to more and more bacteria very quickly. Now, how about this word called fecundity? This means number of offspring. How many offspring are these rabbits going to have during their life? If they have high fecundity, they're going to have many offspring. That leads to a rapidly growing population. So those are the 4 characteristics there of populations that grow very rapidly. Now we're going to look at something called carrying capacity. What is the carrying capacity? Sometimes we designate this with the letter K, and we call this the very highest population size that an ecosystem can support based on limiting factors like food, water, or habitat. So at any one time, what is the highest amount that the population can support? This is determined by a few different things. One of these things that determines carrying capacity is called biotic potential. What does that mean? The maximum reproductive rate of a population in an ideal condition. They have everything they need. That helps determine what the number of the carrying capacity could be, because it really is a number. And also environmental resistance, so things that limit growth. So if you put these two together, biotic potential and resistance, then that's going to determine for you how big can your population get. So as your population reaches that carrying capacity number, the growth rate is going to go down because the resources become more scarce. And my question to you is, what happens to mortality and what happens to fecundity? So as the population reaches carrying capacity, is the death rate going to go up? or down? And is the amount of children being born, babies being born, going to go up or down? Let's take a look at what this looks like a little bit. Okay, on a graph, carrying capacity designated as K can sometimes be a dotted line. So what you've got on the x-axis of the graph is time, and what you've got on the y-axis is population size. Now, theoretically, when the population size reaches this line here, K, that's the highest that the population number is going to get. It's showing you a theoretical graph in number one and a more realistic graph in number two. And we'll take a look at this a little bit more in just a minute. But these are two different ways to represent this, and realize that even though there's no numbers on the y-axis, this is going to be a number like 1,000 individuals or some number that would indicate what's the highest that population size can be at that time. Now let's take a look at two different ways that populations grow. The first growth curve is called exponential growth curve. Please draw this on your notes and take a look and say you can name it the J curve or the exponential growth curve. This is how a population will grow when there are no limiting resources and nothing is holding it back whatsoever. Unrestricted growth. So this is also kind of known as biotic potential because it's the maximum potential growth rate. Nothing is holding this population back. Now, in real life, this can occur initially at the beginning of a population growth, but limiting resources usually come into play: competition, food, disease, predators, and they eventually limit this population. But all populations can grow exponentially if they have unlimited resources. They have everything they need. So that is exponential growth curve. Now, a more realistic curve is going to look like this. This is called the S curve or the logistic growth curve. It's exponential for the first part, and then it becomes shaped like an S. And this is as limiting factors are taking effect and they're slowing down the growth rate of the population, and it's reaching carrying capacity. So this is a more realistic type of growth curve. This is what eventually populations are going to get to. You can see it starts out very much like the J curve, but then it starts to slow down and reaches carrying capacity. That's called logistic growth. Most populations are going to get to this point at some point in time as they're growing, and you'll see what that looks like. Now, here's just another little way to look at these two together, exponential versus logistic. And I just wanted to show you this because this is biotic potential versus resistance. So growth without limits, exponential. Growth with resistance, logistic growth. Competition, limiting factors hit that, and it ends up looking more like this S curve. And you can see on this one, there is a number, 2,000, for the carrying capacity. So that is just an example of one number. Okay, in real life, what a growth curve would look like for a population is going to be more like this. It's not going to look exactly like a J or exactly like an S. It's going to be over time on the x-axis. The population size can start low, and then there's a little bit of lag here, and then it's going to grow exponentially, and then sometimes there it reaches the carrying capacity, and look what happens here. And you need to know what this is. This is called overshoot. So guess what? They went too high. All the resources that they have, whatever this population is, let's say it's rabbits or anything like that, they went past the number of resources that they had and they got too many. And then what's going to happen is when you do that overshoot, then all of a sudden these organisms up here, this population size is now too high and they don't have enough stuff like water or food, and they're going to experience a dieback. And it's going to come down here and it's going to go underneath the carrying capacity. And then in the next few years, look what's happening. It's oscillating. It goes above, it goes below, it goes above, it goes below. And this is how natural populations really work. It's never going to be exactly a straight line. It's never going to be exactly a J or an S. It's going to fluctuate over time. And so what you need to be able to do is when you look at a graph of a population curve, you need to be able to take a look at all of the oscillations, ups and downs over the whole curve, and estimate what do you think really is the carrying capacity? And sometimes it's going to be a number that you can read off a graph, but you'll have to figure that out. And that's a good skill to have, to look at natural populations and what they really do. Okay, here's another example of a population graphs that curve up and down, and this is called a predator-prey graph. This is just one example of population fluctuations. And so you can see the hare is in the purple and the lynx is the blue. The hare, remember, is a rabbit and the lynx is a cat. So what is going to happen here is that the hare population, look at number one, the hare population is increasing due to the low predator population. There's not as many cats around eating these bunnies, and so their population is going up. So then what happens next is the lynx population increases, because guess what? Now they have a lot to eat. So the increasing lynx population in number three causes the hare population to die off, and it starts to drop way down here. And then the hares dying off increases the lynx, decreases the lynx food source, leading to the lynx dying off. And now again in five, the hare population is increasing. So you can see how this goes up and down over time. What's happening first is the population of the prey is going up first. And then after that, the population of the predator goes up. Then the population of the prey comes down, and then the predator population comes down. So the predator population follows the prey population by a little bit, but this is just a natural fluctuation that happens in a predator-prey dynamic system. Okay, we're going to take a look at this little video called the Texas Mosquito Mystery Crash Course video, and it really is a good, nice summary of populations, but we're going to look at that in class or for homework, so we're not going to look at it right now. Now, the last thing in this section on populations is that there are 4 types of population fluctuations over time, and we're going to take a look at what each one of those is. And the first one is stable. So if a population is stable, it's fluctuating slightly above and below carrying capacity, but it's kind of staying the same. And a good example of this would be a tropical rainforest, because the temperature and the rainfall in the rainforest stay pretty steady over time. And so the population is going to be rather stable. The second type of population cycle here is called erupt. Usually stable, but sometimes it explodes and then crashes. And that's what this is happening in this graph right here. This is exploding way up here to a high number and then crashing down there. That's called erupt population fluctuation. Sometimes this happens with algae and insects, due sometimes to seasonal changes, nutrient availability, things that are not exactly predictable in the environment. That's an erupt cycle. Then we have a cyclic pattern, just like we saw with the predator-prey. And isn't it interesting that we always see the same example here with the lynx and the snowshoe hare? And you can see that these go up and down, and so that forms a cycle. This happens in predator-prey dynamics, and that's usually where you're going to see that. Okay, the last type here is called an irregular, no real recurring pattern happening here. And this is just an article that tells you that large irregular population fluctuations in migratory and Atlantic dunlins, that's a shorebird, are driven by density dependence and climatic factors. So this is kind of a chaos system. We just don't really understand what's going on here. Irregular population cycle. Here's an example of the 4 different types. We have stable in the red. We have irregular in the blue here. Eruptive, this is stable for a long time, and then it goes up and down. And then cyclic here is in the green. And this is just a little cartoon for fun. The drama correlation law, how often someone declares they hate drama and always avoid it, correlated with the rate at which that person actually does create the drama. So that's a little fun cartoon for you. Okay, that introduces populations for you, and we will practice more with this in class, and I hope that helps.